On the afternoon of July the 25th of 2013, Oregon man Derek Mosley equipped himself with a bat and knife before attempting to rob a gun store in Portland. Mosley entered the discount gun sales shop on Beaverton Hillside Highway and tried to mug them out of a gun. According to authorities, the store manager simply pulled out his own personal firearm and pointed it straight at the would-be robber. The manager ordered him to drop the baseball bat, the 9-inch long knife he had on him, and the gun he was trying to steal. Responding deputies arrived to find Mosley on the floor being held at gunpoint by the manager. They handcuffed the 22-year-old on the spot and took him into custody on charges of robbery, theft, unlawful possession of a firearm, and criminal mischief. On February the 28th of 2014, Mosley pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 5 years of probation, which included mental health treatment. He was also ordered to have no contact with the victim and to pay a total of $650 in fines and restitution. Number 8. Junior Francis. Police in Lambeth, London, said that an Englishman who denied having dealt drugs was ultimately undone by his vanity, taking selfies and boasting on social media. 33-year-old Junior Francis has been caught by police in November of 2014 after investigators found his Instagram post, which flaunted thick wads of cash and his extravagant lifestyle. When police raided his South London home on Campbell Close, nearly $11,000 in cash as well as $113,000 worth of crack cocaine and heroin were recovered. Francis was arrested and initially denied any involvement in drug dealing, but investigators found inculpatory evidence from his mobile phone. Several pictures were recovered showing him posing with wads of cash pressed like a telephone to the side of his face. Investigators also found evidence of the proceeds of drug dealing, corroborating the suspect's involvement with local drug dealers. On March the 25th of 2015, Francis was sentenced to 80 months behind bars after he pleaded guilty to possession of Class A drugs with intent to supply and money laundering. Number 7. Amari Hendrick. 24-year-old Amari Hendrick was accused of pulling out a loaded gun in a McDonald's drive-thru in Altamonte Springs, Florida, on February the 16th of 2023 because she reportedly believed she was owed a free cookie. Hendricks confronted a McDonald's employee at the drive-thru, asserting that she was entitled to a free cookie because the employee did not ask her about the franchise's rewards program. The manager of the restaurant came to the drive-thru window and gave Hendricks a cookie, but she became belligerent nevertheless. She grabbed a black handgun, inserted a magazine into the weapon, and proceeded to rack the slide before pointing it at the staff. Hendricks then proceeded to park her vehicle near the front door of the restaurant and immediately walked to the entrance. Meanwhile, the staff called law enforcement while another crew member attempted to lock the door. However, Hendricks forced her way through the front door, grabbed the employee by the arm, and began striking him and forcing him out of the building. The man suffered multiple scratches to his face and neck area. Hendricks then finally decided to leave, got in her vehicle, and drove away before an officer stopped her nearby. The officer gave her several loud commands to exit her vehicle, but she refused. She eventually came out, but was still not compliant, at which point the officer put her in handcuffs. Officers later found a loaded Taurus G3C handgun with a round in the chamber on the driver's side floorboard. They also obtained surveillance footage corroborating the employee's accounts of what happened, which ultimately landed Hendricks at the Seminole County Jail. The woman was facing charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, improper exhibit of a firearm, and battery causing bodily harm, as well as resisting arrest. You're not the same when you're hungry. Number 6. The Armed Robbers. A violent gang in England that targeted newsagents and stores in Kent and Sussex was caught by police after one of their members posed for a selfie sporting the same pair of pajamas he'd worn during a raid. The gang had carried out at least 7 armed robberies between November of 2011 and June 2012, while wearing balaclavas, brandishing knives, and in some instances, a handgun. They terrorized workers and stole an estimated $44,500 in cash from safes, as well as cigarettes, scratch cards, and stamps from a number of stores. Following a months-long investigation, a suspected member of the group 24-year-old Terry Sullivan was arrested. His involvement in the robberies was confirmed after investigators went through his mobile phone. A group chat in the device titled Armed Robbers showed the other suspects posing for a string of selfies. One of the photos showed a man posing with a handgun in a black balaclava and hooded top. Another showed Sullivan posing in his pajama bottoms, which were the same ones he'd worn during a raid that was caught on surveillance footage. Following Sullivan's arrest, the rest of the gang were taken into custody, namely 31-year-old Christopher Heath, 24-year-old Thomas Balderston, and Christopher Aldred, aged 23. The group were facing charges of possessing a firearm with the intention of committing an offense and conspiracy to rob. Heath and Sullivan later received a 6-year jail sentence after pleading guilty and giving evidence for the prosecution. Balderston and Aldred were found guilty following a trial and were sentenced to 13 years behind bars. Number 5. Felicia Trujillo and Phil Martinez. A Colorado woman worked out a plan with her boyfriend to get narcotics into jail through a courtroom exchange at her own sentencing hearing on January the 27th of 2010. Officials learned of the plot because the woman in jail, 22-year-old Felicia Trujillo, and her boyfriend, Phil Martinez, talked about it on a monitored phone line. The district judge handling Trujillo's case was informed about the couple's plot and consequently allowed the sheriff's deputies to install cameras in his courtroom. Shortly after a mock trial in the courtroom concluded, it was immediately vacated, at which point Martinez entered the courtroom and dropped a bag of narcotics in the jury box just before Trujillo's scheduled hearing. Detectives who were watching the man immediately placed him under arrest. Following the incident, Martinez was facing drug and contraband charges, among others. A month later, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of introduction of contraband in exchange for the dismissal of other charges. The 26-year-old was ultimately sentenced to 3 years of probation. Although Trujillo was facing similar charges, it never became clear what sentence she received, if any. Number 4. Andrew Hennels. After boasting about plans for an armed robbery on Facebook on February the 13th of 2015, Englishman Andrew Hennels robbed a Tesco in Kings Lynn and was subsequently arrested. The 31-year-old had made a series of posts to the social media platform hours prior to the robbery. The posts included a picture of a large knife and details of his plan, which stated he was doing Tesco over. 15 minutes after the aforementioned post, Norfolk police received reports of a man brandishing a knife and demanding cash from staff working at Tesco. Before police arrived, Hennels absconded via a stolen car. Shortly after, he was apprehended at a nearby pub. He was in possession of a knife and $620 in stolen cash. Hennels was charged with robbery, carrying a knife, and carjacking. The following month, he pleaded guilty to the first 2 charges. As a result, the carjacking charge was laid on file. On April the 10th of 2015, the man was handed a 4-year prison sentence. A sergeant from the Criminal Investigation Department of Kings Lynn said that the Facebook announcement made it easier to prove the case because it confirmed what investigators had already known. Number 3. Qua Young. On March the 16th of 2023, a Florida woman was arrested at a McDonald's in Cocoa after she brandished a gun at an employee because of an argument over a meal that wasn't even on the menu. 26-year-old Qua Young had driven into the McDonald's located at 927 Dixon Boulevard shortly before 11 p.m. and reportedly ordered a cheeseburger bundle. Through the drive-thru speaker system, an employee told her that what she wanted wasn't on the menu and suggested another option. However, the woman refused, instead pulling up to the first drive-thru window. Once there, she became belligerent and demanded that her order be taken. The employee asked why Young was so mad over a simple issue. In turn, Young pointed her gun at the worker and verbally threatened her before proceeding further to the last window. The staff immediately called 911 and reported the incident. Responding officers arrived at the scene to find Young behind the wheel of her vehicle with an M&P Shield 9mm gun in the passenger's seat. When questioned about the drive-thru incident, Young denied threatening anyone and said that she had a permit to carry the firearm. She was eventually placed under arrest after officers reviewed security footage confirming the McDonald's employee's claims. It was also determined that the suspect didn't have a valid driver's license. In the end, Young was charged with open carry of a weapon, driving with a suspended license, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. She was booked into jail but subsequently released on a $7,500 bond. Today's topic was requested by XX Papa Baked XX 5110. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jacqueline Souza. 33-year-old Colorado man Brandon Watkins was stabbed to death in the early hours of July the 21st of 2018 after arguing with his fiancée over suspected infidelity. His fiancée, Jacqueline Souza, had called 911 to their Colorado Springs home on Cabana Circle, requesting medical assistance. Responding law enforcement found Watkins unresponsive and bloody on the kitchen floor with a steak knife near his body. Asked about what happened to Watkins, Souza claimed she and her fiancé had argued after the man suggested he wanted to invite a certain guest to their wedding. According to Souza, the suggested invitee was a woman who Watkins had had an affair with once. Upon being told by Watkins that he wanted to invite this woman, Souza simply lost it. The 31-year-old said that she and Watkins fought at home, but her account of what had happened changed with each telling of the story. In one of her versions of events, she claimed that when she accused Watkins of cheating with multiple women, the man came toward her with the knife and grabbed her by the throat. She said she pushed him away, causing him to fall down on top of the knife. Evidence showed Souza had bruising on her neck, proving her claims that Watkins had strangled her. However, investigators also learned that Souza's account was inconsistent with where Watkins's body was found. The woman was initially arrested on suspicion of second-degree murder. She posted her $50,000 bond and was released on July the 24th of 2018. 3 months later, the 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office decided not to pursue the murder charge against Souza. The autopsy results pointed to 3 possible scenarios that could have led to the type of wound Watkins had suffered. However, not one of the scenarios could be proven accurately by Senior Deputy District Attorney Andy Vaughn. Vaughn said he had no likelihood of winning a case against Souza's self-defense claim and thus couldn't file charges. Consequently, Watkins's family continued to seek justice, holding steadfast in their belief in the victim's innocence. They said that the DA's office whitewashed what they considered to be a murder, sending a message to the community that violent criminals wouldn't be charged due to the possibility of a self-defense instruction at trial, though the family asked the judge to appoint a special prosecutor to take another look at the case. It never became clear if Souza even ended up getting prosecuted. We'll line up our episode about when silly arguments go wrong, in case you want to watch that one as well still. Number 1. Nicholas Coffey. Deputies in Volusia County, Florida, tracked down a suspected car thief after he couldn't resist bragging about his newly acquired Mercedes-Benz on social media. 23-year-old Nicholas Coffey and an accomplice used the stolen car to break into several other vehicles on Deltona residential streets during the early morning hours of September the 2nd of 2023. They subsequently stopped at a gas station store where Coffey made a purchase. His face was covered and he was wearing blue latex gloves, but surveillance footage did show his distinctive tattoos, which eventually helped detectives identify him. At the time, authorities were also working on another case involving Coffey and had a warrant out for his arrest already. A search of the suspect's social media revealed photos of him wearing the same clothing as seen in the gas station footage. Coffey also posted about the stolen car, calling it his new ride. Detectives caught up with him the following morning and arrested him on multiple charges, including car theft, burglary, fraudulent use of a credit card, and probation violation. Number 9. Leanda Brown. On May the 28th of 2018, Tony Brown was found on the floor of his Florida home in a pool of his own blood after being shot by his 57-year-old wife. Leanda, the business director, also in his late 50s, had been shot in the back of the head following a minor dispute over a Google search. Tony and Leanda owned a consulting agency together and had been working on a project. Investigators later revealed that the latter felt her partner had spoken to her in a mean tone of voice while expressing his dissatisfaction with her internet search methods. Enraged by his attitude, she subsequently shot him in the back of the head with a .38 caliber gun they owned. As he walked out of the room, Leanda later claimed that seeing him walk away was the last thing she remembered, and her memory of what happened next became a blur. When officers arrived at their home, they found Tony alive but in critical condition and called to have him airlifted to a hospital. He received emergency surgery and was released a week after recovering. Leanda was charged with attempted first-degree murder and taken into custody, where she was held on $500,000 bond. Number 8. Daniel Malone and Terry Thomas. On June the 14th of 2021, a woman named Ivana Jenkins was ambushed and murdered by two men following an argument at an Indiana gas station. Jenkins was standing in line inside the gas station when 19-year-old Daniel Malone and 23-year-old Terry Thomas walked in, visibly armed. They purposely cut in front of her in line, to which Jenkins took exception and reacted by saying that she wasn't afraid of their guns. The two men left the store and waited for her to exit. When she did, they approached her aggressively, and Malone slapped her in the face. Jenkins fought back and began to throw punches at the men. In an effort to defend herself, she fell to the ground in the process, at which point Thomas shot her. He fled the scene in a vehicle while Malone took off on foot, but the police had already been called. When an ambulance arrived at the station, Jenkins was rushed to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead. After analyzing the building's surveillance footage, police identified Thomas and Malone as their suspects. They also found a pendant at the crime scene that was traced back to Thomas, and which had likely been pulled off his neck by Jenkins in the struggle. Both men were ultimately taken into custody, and as of the latest updates on the case, pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. Number 7. Paul Akino. Friends Paul Akino and Jordan Wright got into a fight following a WhatsApp group chat dispute on April the 19th of 2017. What had started out as the two men trading insults eventually led to them challenging each other to a physical fight in southeast London. 19-year-old Wright showed up to the confrontation unarmed, while under the impression that it was a fist fight, but 20-year-old Akino came with a knife. After an initial scuffle, Akino stabbed Wright multiple times, and he succumbed to his injuries on the same day. Wright's mother, Catherine Alade, later revealed that her son's autism had rendered him unable to fully understand the dangers of a street altercation. Akino was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Number 6. Kevin Bachelor. On May the 23rd of 2020, friends Kevin Bachelor and George Allison got into an altercation at a barbecue in Havant, England. The row and brawl that ensued resulted in 26-year-old Bachelor killing the other man. Fellow partygoers later testified to seeing the pair getting along and even taking pictures together until a verbal dispute between them broke out in the kitchen of the home. That's when they started to physically attack each other, before Bachelor got hold of a carving knife and stabbed 21-year-old Allison through his upper left shoulder. The resulting wound was nearly 7 inches deep, and Allison suffered extreme blood loss, to which he succumbed shortly thereafter. Covered in blood, Bachelor fled the scene on a bicycle and rushed to his sister's home for assistance. There, 34-year-old Haley Bachelor and her friend Barry Baker helped Kevin dispose of the murder weapon, wash his clothes, and gave him a change of clothing and shoes to help him avoid getting arrested. Despite their efforts, he was taken into custody later that same night, subsequently maintaining that he'd acted in self-defense. Police had found traces of blood on the shoes he'd worn at the barbecue, and the carving knife he'd used to kill Allison was found several weeks later in a storm drain. On June the 4th of 2021, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years served. Both Haley Bachelor and Barry Baker were found guilty of assisting an offender and were each sentenced to 3 years in prison. Number 5. Tonica Miller. An Indianapolis woman shot her boyfriend of 5 years in the face following an argument about cheating on May the 27th of 2022. Tonica Miller, aged 32, and 41-year-old Deshawn Roscoe shared an apartment together with their 2 young children. After putting their children to bed, they decided to go to a playground within their apartment complex to have intimate relations on a blanket. They were captured by surveillance cameras leaving their apartment at 12:50 a.m. Miller was carrying a handgun, which she later claimed to have brought for protection since it was dark outside. After having intimate relations, the couple got into an argument about Miller cheating on Roscoe, which prompted her to walk away and leave him behind at the playground. Surveillance video captured the woman returning to her apartment, only to make her way back to the playground just a minute later in her car. She exited the vehicle to let Roscoe get in the driver's seat. Still upset over the previous conversation, the man shoved her, and in retaliation, she hit him in the right shoulder. Miller still had the gun in her hand at the time, and it went off as she struck him, releasing a bullet directly into the man's cheek. Miller ran into her building to call the police and then returned outside to try to help her boyfriend by applying pressure to his gunshot wound. Unfortunately, when police arrived, they pronounced him dead at the scene. Miller was arrested and her 2 young children were taken by the Department of Child Services. She was charged with reckless homicide and 2 counts of neglect of a dependent. Number 4. Hana and Johal. On June the 14th of 2014, teenager Stanley Harrison died after being stabbed in the neck with a knife in Daventry, England. On the night of his murder, Harrison was picked up by his childhood friend, 18-year-old Hana and Johal, to carpool to a party together. Once the party was over, they returned to Johal's home with a third friend, Reese Hamad, and continued drinking while they watched TV. The mood shifted when Harrison refused to give Johal a cigarette, leading to a verbal argument that escalated into a physical fight. Johal then went into the kitchen and retrieved an 8-inch kitchen knife to use against Harrison. Hamad intervened and tried to get his friends to stop fighting. In the scuffle, Johal fell to the floor, which gave Hamad a chance to kick the knife away from him before pushing Harrison towards the door, encouraging him to leave. As the teenager turned to exit, Johal, having regained his knife, charged him and stabbed him in the neck. Harrison sustained a severed blood vessel that led to him bleeding profusely as he stumbled and collapsed into the hallway. The police and emergency services were called, but Harrison died in the hospital the following day from complications associated with severe blood loss. Johal was arrested and charged with murder but denied that he'd intentionally stabbed his childhood friend. An investigation revealed that both Johal and Harrison were heavily inebriated and had traces of cocaine in their systems, which a judge determined had contributed to the fatal fight. Johal was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in jail. Number 3. Mason Trevor Toney. A pro-Trump construction worker was killed by his anti-government employee at a construction site after they'd gotten into a heated political argument on January the 20th of 2020. Mason Trevor Toney fatally stabbed his friend and boss, 28-year-old William Knight, with a pointed shovel before fleeing the scene in the latter's pickup truck. When Florida police arrived at the site, they found Knight's dead body, which had been partially covered with an American flag. Police were quickly able to track down Toney, which led to a pursuit that ultimately ended with him crashing the stolen pickup. He was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder and was held without bond. Number 2. Warren Little. On January the 23rd of 2016, a British man strangled his wife with a phone cord following an argument over money. 52-year-old Warren Little was living in Mallorca, Spain, when his wife, Lisa Little, aged 49, came to visit him from London. Warren called the emergency services 2 days after the woman's arrival, and paramedics found her dead at his home. Little's autopsy revealed that her cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation. Warren was arrested that same day and taken in for questioning. Investigators asked him directly if he'd strangled his wife with a mobile phone cable, to which he answered yes. However, just a day later, Warren's story changed as he told a judge in a hearing that Lisa had choked to death while they'd engaged in a sadomasochistic role play, which she'd allegedly suggested, and that her death had been completely accidental. The claim wasn't consistent with what he told the police on at least 2 different occasions. As part of a plea deal, he eventually confessed that he'd killed her following an alcohol-induced outburst of rage about her wanting money that he wouldn't give her. Prosecutors were seeking a 20-year prison sentence for a murder conviction, but his confession got him a lesser charge of homicide and 12 years in prison. The little's daughter, 21-year-old Demi Nicole, filed for a restraining order against her father that would prohibit him from coming within 19 miles of her and her young son for the next 22 years. She also told the court that her mother had been a victim of domestic violence at her father's hands and had sued him for about $180,000 in the past. Number 1. Elanor Stern. On December the 12th of 2015, a Florida woman kicked a state police officer at a Deerfield Beach Department of Motor Vehicles after getting into a row with a department employee. Video shot by another DMV goer showed 31-year-old Elanor Stern having a heated verbal argument with the unnamed employee at the counter. An officer was consequently called over to remove her from the building. Stern was seen on video kicking the officer, who then began to wrestle with her on the ground as she continued to attack him. He struggled to handcuff Stern as she thrashed uncontrollably on the ground. The enraged woman was able to get up and away for a moment as she screamed profanities and insults at the officer. He was eventually able to get a hold of her and remove her from the building. Stern was charged with resisting arrest but was released after posting a $100 bond. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have superhuman strength but have pudding for brains, or be physically weak but have extraordinary intelligence?